Welcome back to the See Munsters channel for all your best spooky content and horror. On today's video, I am going to share a story of one man's encounter with a creature during his trip to the beautiful Cascade Mountains in Oregon. I am an avid upland bird hunter who lives in Oregon. I have a Flushing dog I train to hunt, an English setter, Reggie, who I take out most weekends of the hunting season to look for pheasant, quail, grouse, partridge, or ducks. 2 weekends ago was the end of quail, grouse, and partridge season, so I planned a day trip out to eastern Oregon. For those who don't know, most of Oregon is essentially a desert. The area between the Cascade Mountains and the Pacific is rainy and forested, and what most people think of when they picture Oregon. However, with the exception of a few small mountain ranges, 2/3 of the state east of the Cascades is just sagebrush, red rocks, and arid country for hundreds of miles to the Idaho border. I loaded Reggie and my gear in the truck early Saturday morning, several hours before sunrise, and set off. Just at first light, we got to a big, open river valley I spent lots of time exploring, but this specific area was new to me. It was about 30 degrees, looked like a light dusting of snow the night before, but otherwise pretty dry and would be a fairly clear day. I love these moments more than anything in life, being the only human in a massive wild landscape without a single trail or building for miles. The isolation, the giddiness for the upcoming adventure, the feeling of exploring an area that looked the same 500 years ago, the feeling of going out to get my own food, the contrast between hot coffee in my thermos and the cold winter wind on my exposed hands. All of it. It's just my favorite place to be. I got the dog ready, put on my boots and pack, loaded the shotgun, and we set off along the top of the valley ridge, 600 to 700 yards above the river, looking out over the arid, cold landscape, hued by the silvery blue wolf light of early winter mornings. About an hour after we started hiking along the valley ridge, we came to a gully that cut downhill through the ridge toward the river, which we'd have to cross. I picked a route down the steep rise to the dry, boulder-filled creek bed at the bottom of the gully, where a deer trail led back up to the other side. Halfway down the slope, Reggie started acting real strange. He stopped about 30 feet in front of me, cocked his head to the side, and fixed his gaze down to our left, toward a spot in the dry creek bed as it dropped down the valley. He then leaned his head forward, as if trying to get a better view, and then started turning around toward me, without pulling his eyes off the spot. And then, he bolted up the steep side of the gully to where I was standing. "What is it, bud?" I asked him. He kept switching his gaze from my eyes to the same spot below us, while pacing around in half circles. It was strange. My first thought was a mountain lion, which I always have at the back of my mind. They're all over the place out here, but they usually clear out long before they let people, let alone a person with a dog, get this close to them. In that case, I figured that probably wasn't it. "We've got to cross this gully and keep moving," so I patted the dog on the head and kept on moving down towards the bottom of the gully. Reggie stayed right on my heels the entire time. As I was crunching over the gravel, Reggie stopped in the middle of the creek bed and once again was fixated on something to our left, down the gully. This time he dropped his spine and I could see his hackles raise. Oh shit, I thought. Maybe there really is some kind of predator in the rocks down there. I flipped off the safety of my shotgun and started walking toward a big boulder in the middle of the creek bed that was blocking my view. It looked like once I was past it, I'd have a clear field view over the entire gully, all the way down the valley side to the river. Reggie was still frozen in place, and I patted his head as I passed on his right side. But once I got a few paces past him, I noticed he wasn't following me. I came around the big rock on the right side, and in front of me was a big clearing in the creek bed, and a huge bighorn sheep, no more than 25 feet in front of me. We run into bighorn sheep out in this country all the time, so it wasn't that much of a surprise. What was surprising was how this thing was sitting. That's the only way I can think to describe it. It was sitting on its folded back legs like a dog would, holding itself up with a straight-backed posture, front legs locked forward with its hooves in the gravel, staring straight ahead so I couldn't see its face. "What the fuck?" I said out loud. These are very wary and skittish animals. They'd never let a person get this close. A bunch of things went through my mind. Maybe it's dead? No, it was cold, and I could see steam coming from its slow breaths. Maybe it's wounded and dying? Maybe it's stuck on some old fencing or something? Right then, Reggie started snarling, like he was in a fight, and it startled me. He didn't even look like an English setter anymore. He looked feral, like a coyote. I got to a spot about 8 feet directly to its right, and about 3 to 4 feet above it, up the slope of the gully, and could start to make out its face. Its mouth was slightly agape, with milky snot running from its nose and saliva dripping from its bottom lip, with little spurts and flecks of both shooting out every time it exhaled a steamy breath. "What the fuck?" I kept saying out loud. I took another step and could start to see its eyes, which had tears pouring out of them, and it sounded almost like it was moaning. Is it a virus or something? Is its lower spine broken? I was about to turn around when it snapped its head up to the right and looked right at me. Until my last day alive, I will never forget that moment. I didn't notice the dog move, but Reggie was suddenly right at my feet, with a strap from my backpack in his mouth, fiercely pulling on it as hard as he could, but I couldn't move. I couldn't raise my shotgun. I couldn't look away from the ram. I was stuck. Then, the ram started weeping. Its facial features became very human. Its eyes bulged. Its bottom lip was quivering. It was whimpering out noises like it was trying to speak between sobs, while sucking in air sporadically like a crying child would. Then, unmistakably, it started speaking. Or, more like, it started pleading. It only used a total of 3 different words, but they were unmistakable. "Don't go. Please don't go. Don't go. Please, please don't go." It increased its intensity gradually, from a whimpering pleading to a desperate screaming. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Reggie finally yanked on my pack hard enough to get me to stumble, and the second I broke eye contact with that thing, I could breathe again. I pushed myself up and screamed "go" to the dog and grabbed my shotgun and half sprinted, half crawled up the hill out of the gully as fast as I could. The ram's screaming was getting louder, and it started to hurt my ears. Reggie was ahead of me, stopping every 20 feet or so to look back at me and bark toward the noise. I could see the dog was shaking like a leaf. The screaming started to turn into a single unbroken roar that sounded half beast and half wind. After a minute or so, I got my shit together, and I booked it the entire 3 miles or so back to the truck, jogging the entire way. As soon as I could see my truck, I threw the dog into the passenger seat, the gun into the back seat, and piled in behind the wheel without even taking my pack off, fired her up, and tore down the dirt road much faster than was safe. I got to the highway and didn't stop until we were at my house. It's been 2 weeks since that day, and I still haven't been able to sleep a full night or talk to anyone about it. Reggie has never liked sleeping in my bed before, but he's curled up as close as he can to me every night since. I have no way to rationally explain what happened out there. I have no clue what it was controlling or possessing that animal. But I do know one thing. It felt like there was a person in that ram somewhere. It felt like a person's spirit was stuck in there and desperately wanted out. For more spooky content, you can click the links on my profile to check out my TikTok and listen to the We See Munsters podcast.